right. So, Miss Tamara, Angela, and Jae Bae, we are here today having, I feel like, some pretty snazzy conversations so far. We've been behind the
Yes.
scenes vibing and getting to know each other a little bit. And we just now hit the record button for y'all so y'all can get in on some of this juiciness. Um, First, I think I just want to start out. Let's tell them a little bit about who we are, how we're vibing, and then we can get into some of the juiciness of all the fun things we'll be bringing them over time as we do some of these collabs.
Yes.
So I'm gonna kick it to you and let them tell them who you be, who you are, what you do.
Ooh. Yes. So I'm Tamara Angela. Known to a lot of my clients as Fairy Godmother. Somebody called me that a long time ago and it kind of stuck and I liked it. I was like, oh, that's kind of cute. So kept
Yeah.
it. I am by trade a clinical therapist, but I like to let people know that I am a psychic medium who went into clinical therapy for a profession. And so the way I kind of describe it is it's like you come, you meet me, we talk about things, you leave out changed. And I feel like that's just good human connection. That's the way things should be. You know, when you encounter people, you should leave them a changed, better version of yourself.
I like that. I like that. And so I I am Jae Bae, also known as the Healing One, Jasmine. And same, Healing One came ooh, years ago. When I was long time ago, when I was still in fitness training.
Mm,
And I was I already had a background, and some of y'all have heard me talk about this before, but I had a background doing wellness and in-home support for people with catastrophic injuries. And so
mm-hmm,
I segued to take an emotional break from that into the gym. And I still ended up being the sick trainer, as they would call me. I was
mm-hmm,
the one that they would assign all the clients to that had either some type of need for rehab or had just had surgery or some type of major injury, because I just had this way of being able to work with them. And one of my clients was like, "You're so healing. I'm gonna call you the healing one." And I was like, "Okay." And it just picked up. Like, I'll take it, I guess. And it just picked up, and other people started calling me that, and so that's been my name all these years. And as I love to tell y'all, I just like to create a buffet to nourish your soul, and that looks like bringing the wellness. That looks like bringing the mental health support from a career in counseling. That looks like bringing the spirituality and the metaphysical and the ritual and just all the things that I like to play with and that I
mm-hmm.
enjoy. I like to give it to y'all. And so that's kind of what
Love
brought
it.
us yes, that's kind of what brought us together. Is I reached out to Tamara because I've seen you talk about just a lot of the ritual, a lot of the metaphysical, the astrology, numerology, different things. And I was like, I like her. Let me see what she does. And so I invited her to come into lab and let's do some chats, because on the soul nourishing mentorship experience, a lot of my students are interested in that. On the SIP podcast, the Sex Intimacy Power podcast, they stay on my neck about the zodiacs. Listen, every week somebody is sending us a message. When y'all gonna talk about the zodiacs some more? Because we talk about it from our perspectives,
Uh-huh.
and we're always like, okay, we're gonna tell y'all what we think, but we don't have an expert. And they be like, when y'all gonna talk? Okay, so I was like, let's find somebody so we can have some juicy conversation. And
Oh
let's
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. No,
let's
you
start
know
there with the zodiac.
that's so funny. I actually do composite love profiles for a friend of mine who is a matchmaker.
Okay.
And so she has like this whole setup, which I think is amazing. It's like once you pay her for her matchmaking services, then she puts you with somebody who does like a therapy session with you. There's a sex therapist that's there who helps like talk about that kind of stuff, and then there's me who does astrology. There's somebody who helps with your look and putting all that together. She has like all these consultants, and one of the things I do so I like pull the natal chart, but I do what I call a composite love profile. Because one of the things I like people to understand is that like you're not just your sun sign.
Yes.
So sun sign is fun. So it's like, oh, it's Libra season, it's Virgo season, it's Scorpio season. But the reality is we all have layers, right? You're not just this one-dimensional cartoon character at all. We all have layers. And so what I find is most people aren't even compatible in their sun sign. Like that's not even where your compatibility lies most of the time.
Okay.
So understand, so us in the Western world, we really get into sun sign because I mean that kind of came from like Cosmo magazine and stuff like that, like starting to post that because they wanted to pull women in with readership because women are consumers, right? And so this is like the early 1930s or so where they started putting astrology signs in there. Overseas, they actually look at you based on your moon sign and your rising sign. They want to know what your ascendant is because your ascendant is the version of you that people meet when they first meet you, right? So this is how you can meet somebody and not like them the first time, but then you guys go on to be best friends because you kind of move into those other aspects of you where you guys are more compatible. So when I'm looking at compatibility for couples, I'm looking at your moon sign. So that is your emotional core, how you manage the world through emotional intelligence. Your Mars is important. Your Mars energy tells me how you make moves, how you do things, right?
Okay.
So, if you have one, part of the couple that's a go-getter and the other person, they're not like entrepreneur, like they're gonna go work the 9 to 5, like they're gonna like they don't do extras outside the 9 to 5. It's not that they're not compatible, it's just that you need to know that so you don't push the other person to be something that they're not, right? Other thing, your Mercury, your house 3, that all has to do with communication. We need to know, like, communication is a big piece of compatibility, right? The other huge thing is understanding nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
So I've done natal charts with people, and I will tell you a couple things when I do your chart. I say, when you give me the time, you give me your exact time, date of birth, place of birth, right? If we start doing the chart and you're like, this sounds nothing like me. I've had that happen a few times. I've had to ask the person, did you give me the right time of birth? Because if it's off by even 2 minutes, sometimes it can change everything. If the moon, because the moon moves into a different sign every 2 days, right? So if you were born on a day where the moon was going to transit into another sign, and say the moon transited from Leo to Virgo that day, right? So it went from, the moon is in Leo at 10:12, and then it moved into Virgo at 10:13. And you gave me your birth time as 10 a.m. That means I calculated you as a moon in Leo. Fire sign. That the moon fire signs, they don't typically sit still. They have a wanderlust. They're super passionate people. They're like pretty boisterous. But you were really born at 10:20. That's a 20-minute difference. Moon and Virgo people are complete difference. That's a moon sign born in earth energy that's highly analytical, that likes routine. That's two different people, right? So you could be doing, I could be doing your natal chart and you're like, this doesn't sound like me. The other reason is nature versus nurture. I've had people who were like, I look at their chart, they're like nothing but fire. I see fire all over their chart. Leo, Sagittarius, they've got all these fire alignments, and they're quiet. Quiet, calm, docile people. And I'm like, what happened? It's because somebody turned their fire down all their life, kept extinguishing it. You talk too much. Why are you asking all these questions? Go sit down. calm down. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? You need to go into, I've had people who were supposed to be creatives who had to go into a military structure because that's the legacy of the family.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what their purpose was.
You hit something right there when you were talking about the fire, because that's a big part of I guess the experience that I've been in recently for the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this moment where I realized, I've done a shit ton of therapy. Like, obviously, I have a therapeutic background, been in it for almost 2 decades, got multiple degrees. That was, my profession. And I am one of those people that believe if you're going to do the thing, you need to experience the thing. So I've
Mm-hmm.
always had therapy as well, right? But I got to this point where I just felt like nothing that I'm doing is allowing me to feel settled. I'm doing the
Mm.
therapeutic work, I'm doing all this shit, but nothing
Yeah.
is allowing me to feel settled within myself. And so I kept digging and saying, okay, spirit, there's clearly something that I need to key in on for me that
Mm.
is going to help me make this make sense. What is that? And so I looked at different things, and astrology and human design and all the different things, because I was curious, okay, what is it that I need to play with that will help me figure some things out? And I have been around astrology for years. I've had friends that love it. Never really been my thing, other than just knowing that I was a Sagittarius. That made sense. Okay, let's do that. But as I started digging, like, that was the thing that kept singing to my soul and saying, take a deeper look. And
Mm-hmm.
so as I started digging, everybody wanted to make it make sense that, oh, girl, you need to pull this chart, you blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wait,
It's
there's too much.
overwhelming.
There's a lot. So I said, higher self, spirit, whatever y'all want to call your beliefs, what is it that I need to look at? And they said,
Mm.
you need to understand your fire. So
Yeah.
I got into my chart, and I do have a lot of fire, but that was really where I was drawn to, was understanding that I have, not only do I have a lot of fire, but if you've ever had, some people haven't, some people haven't, if you've ever had the conversation with your higher self, your spirit team, to figure out what were you truly created out of, I was created out of fire.
Mm.
So I was like, well, what does that mean? I feel crazy as hell right now. What does this mean? So I dug deeper, went down that rabbit hole and kept asking that question. And fire was the thing I needed to focus on. And what I saw was, I had a mix of people in my life growing up as a child that were extremely introverted, but also some were extremely extroverted, and nobody really understood. And you can't blame them, everybody's doing the best they can, right? But
Yeah.
nobody
Yeah. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
understood how to nurture that, because I was an introvert. I am an introvert, but I also had this other part of me that had the capacity to be like really big and bold and out there. And nobody knew how to handle that. So it was always exactly what you said. You're asking too many questions. Go sit down. Why do you always want to know something? I was the kid that
Yeah.
wanted to break it down and fix it and put it together and figure it out, right? And
We
so as
also
I
come from the era of a child is to be seen and not
and
heard,
not heard, go be
right?
still, go be
Yeah.
in a child's place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I broke that down for myself starting about 3 years ago and really dug into it to now, it was me learning how to nurture that fire. Because what it started to happen is I had internalized it, and it was literally causing me health issues.
Yeah. It's
Like
you.
it,
It's you. Think of it like, so my fire people. So here's the thing.
mm,
I'm a Capricorn sun, right? I have, what was it, 27% earth in my chart, but fire and air are both 25%,
okay, yeah.
right? So those are both second equally. And so people, when they meet me, they don't necessarily equate me to being a Capricorn. All
Mm,
of my communication areas are in Sagittarius, all of them. I
got
don't
you.
have any chill. There's none. So my house 3 Sagittarius with a Neptune in Sagittarius, which is the seer in me. I got my Mars in Capricorn there, which is I said what I said.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Okay.
it's very I said what I said. And then my Mercury is in Sagittarius. So there's no chill. There's no, like, I'm a straight shooter. I'm gonna say the thing. But I say it because I have the gift of sight, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Neptune is there, which is like, that is my gift of sight. So I'm not just arbitrarily pulling stuff out. It's like, nah, I see this. Do you see it? Now,
Right.
what I've had to do is learn that that's who I am, right? Because people would be like, oh, it's a little bit, it lacks tact and all of this other stuff. I remember I had a supervisor tell me one time, you need to pick and choose your battles better. And I was just like, no, like, I'm gonna say the thing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna say, like, you're not gonna bring it to me and I'm just, But what I learned was she was partially right, because what that is that I am not supposed to get in the way of everybody's karma because I see it, right? So just because I see it, like,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'm gonna have to sit back and let you train wreck, right? But that's me having to work my own gifts and understand, like, everybody's not my assignment, everybody's not my charge. But I had to understand that that level of fire exists in me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That fire is also the creative portion of me as well. So I had to understand that that level of fire existed in me so I could stop feeling crazy, because, like, I would hear things and I'd be like, boom, like this,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, I'm quick-witted. You see it, like, and that works in certain areas and then it doesn't in others,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
that's the duality of who we are as humans, is like, a lot of times when I'm showing people their natal chart, it's like, I could see where this works really, really well, but over here it probably doesn't. So it's all the same storehouse though, right?
Yeah.
You're not gonna get that. So this is where people say a lot of times too, oh, I'm so great at career stuff, but I suck at relationships. You're the same person. The same person shows up in relationships, same person shows up at work. It's just that at work, you've exercised that muscle to make it work for you and get your dollar.
Mm-hmm.
In
Mm-hmm.
relationships, it's not the same payoff. You have to learn how to, not so much code switch with that, but you have to learn how to, it's a form of it though, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to learn how to, in your personal relationships, know that, like, yes, so being a seer works great for work. In your
Yeah.
personal relationships, everybody don't want to know it all. And some people want to be reckless. They don't want to be warned. Like, they know they're going to be reckless. They know what they're doing and they
Mm-hmm.
want to go have fun. Okay, mind your business, right? And so I've learned with my fire, when people bring things to me, I'm I'm like, girl, that's crazy. I do that a lot.
Yeah.
Or I'm like, do you want to know what I think?
See, that's my thing. I ask, right?
Mhm.
I like when people, cause same. So I have a lot of fire, and I have a lot of Virgo in me. I was looking um back through
So
my
that
stuff
so
this
that
year. I
Virgo
was
is earth energy that's ruled by Mercury, right?
like,
So
mm-hmm.
Mercury keeps us in the ethers because
Mm-hmm.
Mercury is communication, and Mercury is that communication is actually air energy, right? So that's you pull in divine knowledge from the ethers. You're analyzing things, you're scrutinizing things, you're seeing the details, right? You can look at all those little things. But then
Mm-hmm.
that Virgo, that earth portion of it, it's also very much so it's the maiden, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a space where it's like, what do I do with all of that? That earth energy wants to organize all that you've seen and then make it make sense.
Yep.
Like, I'm going to organize, like, I've seen all this, so it makes sense to say it, or it makes sense to put this together, or it makes sense to put it out there or create an offering with it, because the maiden portion of you wants to create an offering that you can give to nurture, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
what that Virgo energy really wants to do with things.
Yes. And it's funny. So this is how I described it. And what you said to me just now, I'm like, oh my God. Years ago, I was talking to this pastor, and I want to say I was 29, 30, right?
Mhm.
And I think he was in his 50s. And we were having this conversation, and I was trying to get him to understand why I was struggling, because so in church, I grew up in church, was trained in ministry before I went, more mainstream in spirituality and just in my own path. So in the church, I was called prophetic, right? And I was trying to explain
Mhm.
to him why I was just over it and I didn't want it no more. And he was really struggling, like, but it's such a gift. And I was like, listen, you can take this shit. And so so what I described was, I said, imagine, because this is how it really felt for me at the time. I said, imagine you've got this experience with God where you get to the highest of the highs and you can see and you can feel and hear so clearly. It makes sense. It's right there.
Mhm.
There's nothing in your way. It's right there. And so when people come to me and I'm praying with them or giving them a word, spirit is flowing. I don't even have to try. It just comes. I said, but imagine when you are done with that piece of it and your spirit has to reacclimate itself back into this body, because you got to ground. You have to experience the duality of spirit and human, right? I said,
Mhm.
so you leave this, and it's like you crash back down to earth. So you go from the highest of the high to the lowest of the low as
Mm.
your self is trying to recalibrate. And he was like, wow. I said, that's the only way that I know how to describe what that feels like.
Mm.
And
And
when I
that's what
came to
happens when we
Midwest,
don't get taught how to
and that's what it was for me. It was
manage.
balance, because I had so many people pulling, always wanting to access, always wanting to use, always wanting to get a word or be prayed. You get what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so I was having to learn, and spirit was having to teach me, because I really couldn't have a lot of mentors at that point in my life for different
Yeah.
reasons. So spirit was having to mold me, and I learned a lot, trial by fire. But the way you just explained it with that earth and that fire, that's really what it was. They were constantly at war as I was trying to figure out what it all meant and how it felt and make sense of it. Which is really why spirit took me deeper into astrology at this point in my life, because I have so much fire and I have so much earth. They're at it. If and I always can feel when I'm not balanced in myself.
Well, and see, this has to
You
do
know,
with where your Neptune is as well, because your Neptune
Sagittarius.
is what tells you. Neptune is that healing element, but depending on where that is, it can show like somebody who's like a highly sensitive person, somebody who has prophetic value, somebody who's able to just like have that clairvoyance, like you just see or you just
Mhm,
know, right?
mhm,
And
mhm.
so those things work out well as the auntie, right? Those things are revered when you're the auntie that just knows stuff, right? Because people want to come to you for wisdom.
Mhm.
But how do you become the auntie? You had to have been the 5-year-old child that knows stuff,
Exactly.
right? So then they call that child precocious, or they talk too much, or they know too much, or whatever.
Mhm.
But I've always been this, right? And so there's a period of time kind of in between age where people are cool with you just knowing things when it's convenient for them.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's not until you become maybe 30, 40 or so where it's revered. In your 60s or 70s, it's revered. But how did you
Right.
get there? Like, I've always been that person that's able to tap in, or have an understanding. It's part of, for you, what makes you a therapist, right?
Absolutely.
So this is why I say I am this seer who chose to do these other professions, right? So it
Absolutely.
was the reason why when I went into being an esthetician, oh, I left therapy like, I'm done. I'm not doing nobody else's court reports, because
Mm,
I don't, because sitting and listening to the docket was stressful. I'm not
mhm.
doing I'm not talking to another DFAX worker. I'm not talking to another probation officer. I'm not doing none of that stuff. Like, I was just like, I am done, right?
Mhm.
And then I said, I'm going to go into aesthetics, which was, I've always been into beauty. My grandmother was a licensed cosmetologist, and she taught me how to do hair very young. So I was always doing hair and makeup for my friends. I did everybody's hair. If I didn't do your hair, I babysat you, or I probably did both, right? So all of these things that I've always done, people, I think about it, I'm like, people brought me their babies at 13 to watch and was like, bye, here you go. And I'm like, that's crazy. But it's me, right? People still do that. Babies still lean towards me. It's still the same energy. It's just that I didn't know what to do. I mean, I made money off of it then. I made good money because I babysat everybody, you know. And then I did hair and makeup and all of these things like that. That's always sustained me. And then so I said, well, I'm gonna make this change, right? And I go into aesthetics and get licensed and everything. So now I'm in the treatment room. I've got my aromatherapy. Everything smells great. It's fantastic. And people are on the table telling me
all their business.
All the business.
Yeah.
Facial massage and everything, but I'm also not understanding that I'm opening up chakras. I'm opening up meridians, right? Because I'm here, facial massage. I'm tapping lymph drainage. I'm doing all of this stuff, energy work, hands, all of this stuff, right? And I'm like, why are people telling? And they would say it. They're like, I don't know why I want to tell you this, but. And I was like, no. I'm not a therapist no more. I left that. I don't do that. I don't do that.
Yes.
Girl, lay on this table. Let me pull the steamer closer so you'll be quiet because I don't want to hear all of that, right? And I realized it was like, okay, I thought I changed all that stuff out, but I'm still me, right? There's still these reasons why people come to me. I first had my natal chart done. I was like 19. I always loved astrology, always loved reading about it, all of those things like that. I went to go visit my dad in Houston that summer, off from college for the summer break. And he was working part-time at this store. And he got me a job working because I was like, I need some money. Like, if I'm gonna come visit and I'm gonna miss out on babysitting money, you want to, like, I'm gonna need some money. So he had me working with him at the store. And he told me, it's like, oh, there's this lady there and everybody thinks she's weird. So I was like, point me to her, right? Because like, I like all the, like, point me to this person. Well, we ended up eating lunch together one day. I can still see her face. Please don't ever ask me her name because I don't know. This is almost 30 years ago at this point, but I can see this woman's face and still feel her energy. So she sat down and we get to talking. She had like butterflies in her hair and she looked like a little fairy. And so, like the next day, she was just very sweet, just very sweet. At that time, they would call it eccentric.
Yeah,
that's the word that they
or
would
eclectic.
Eclectic, right? So she says, "Do you know what time you were born?" And I said, I know my mother said sometime in the morning." She said, "You know, ask your mother what time you were born. I want to gift you something." So I said, "Okay." So I asked my mother and she gives me the birth time or whatever. And the lady brings me back. I still have the printout. It's old school printout though. You know, it's on that old school printer paper. But I kept it. She printed out my birth chart for me. It was like tons of papers because it explained all of the things. And it told me things like, you know, by the time you're 30, this. She had put predictions in there and everything that were all actually true. But I didn't really pay attention to all of that. So she said, "I'm going to give you this and you're not going to pay attention to it until the time is right." Said, okay. And like clockwork, every year I would pull it out and I would read something new. And it took time for it to kind of settle in. But it wasn't until like my late 30s. And I, like every year, I get a new journal and I would read what was on it. Like by my mid 30s or so, like my late 30s, I was like, oh, I see what she gave me. Oh my God. Like all of a sudden, you know. So for people that get their charts done. When I'm doing your chart with you, I don't expect you to understand astrology. That's not your job. My job is I break it down in an elementary way that makes the energy make sense to you.
Yeah.
Because I just want you to understand what it means so you can use it. I'm not asking you to be able to read it. You don't need to become an expert. I'm not teaching you the alignments and all that stuff like that, but I'm looking at it as like, okay, so I use it as a personal development tool.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about, those love scopes and stuff like that, for people to understand, like, you need to know, is your partner more prone to living a sedentary life, right? If they have more sedentary alignments, like, water or earth, excuse me, in certain areas, they're not going to want to be the ones to get up and travel.
Mm-hmm.
So I see those posts all the time. If my man don't travel, that ain't for me. That's not always true. It's not always true. That can be the right person for you. They just don't travel. If you know they don't travel, go get you friends you could travel with.
Just join a travel group and be at peace.
Leave that man at home and leave him alone, because you're not supposed to change him. He's going to be there to do all the rest of the other things. He just don't travel, right? And it's not in his chart. And he's okay.
Yeah.
And that's where compatibility lies.
Yeah. But I think that's a good point that you're highlighting, is that, so again, and I can't remember whether I said this before we started recording or not, but one of the things that I live my life by is not everything works for everybody, but anything can work for anybody.
I love
meaning that, I don't look at it, and I am not stressing myself trying to remember what planet is here, because I'm like, say what now? What I look for is the patterns. I look for the patterns in my life, and I look for the patterns and the information to help me understand myself, right? And that's been a game changer for me. And that's why I tell anybody, like, figure out what makes sense for you and use that, and leave the rest in peace and let it be, because you don't have to understand it all. You may not use it all, but if you can find those key pieces of information. So like for me, it was understanding my fire. How is my fire being influenced? How is it being affected? And I love what you said about, when we have those natural inclinations, we have those natural parts of our personality and our characteristics. Oftentimes as kids, they're not celebrated. So the thing that makes us great now in my 40s was not celebrated when I was in my childhood, right?
Yeah.
It was celebrated in my 20s when I was in ministry. They loved me being a seer and a prophetess. They loved being able to pull on that anointing and get that word and have somebody praying for them and seeing stuff move and having faith operating. But they loved it when they could control it, right? And so all those things that I went through served to squash the fire, contain it. And when I internalized it, it turned into health issues for me.
Yeah.
And so I had to better understand it in order to nurture it and keep it at healthy balance. And that's why I tell people, like, it's not about having to do it one way or the other. It's about feeling your way through and figuring out what's affecting you and why, so that you can figure out how to better utilize it, because everything is energy. And if we can figure out how to use that energy for our good, then it helps us, whether it's the romantic relationship, whether it's the professional space, whatever it is, the
and
more
just
you
finding your
give.
compatibility, or because that's the other thing too. I tell people with their chart is like, there are things in here that this is your divine design.
Yeah.
And some of it is flawed, and you're never going to be good at it. So if you know that, go find the compliment or go outsource it. Don't try to fix it. Right? Don't try to fix it. So my folks who are second house in Cancer, right? Or like a Jupiter in Cancer. So your second house has to do with your finances, like it's like money matters. It's how you see money, or how you see things of value, right, in your life. And typically for us, that currency has to do with like money. I also look at that as like how you pay out energy. And balance that stuff out as well. So somebody who has a second house in Cancer, they're going to do what my mother used to call burn a hole in their pocket, right? As soon as the money get there, like it's just going to burn right on through. But it's with a sense, because Cancer is ruled by moon. So it's this sense of like nurturing and mothering. It's like, oh, I think I'm doing the best for you, right? Jupiter in Cancer is also very much like that. So my Jupiter and Cancer people, Jupiter is an expansive planet, right? It's the king of all the planets. So it's like bigger than life energy. A lot of whatever that energy there is amplified. And so a Jupiter in Cancer is like, how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? Right? How can I take care? Well, those are great things, but it can be to your detriment, right? And so if you understand that you have a Jupiter in Cancer, or you understand that your second house is in Cancer, then your mate needs to be a guard dog. That's your compliment. Your mate can't be a house 2 in Cancer. None of y'all have money.
Be broke and bad and disgusted.
And if they are, then the two of you need to understand that you need an accountant. Say your mate is a second house in Cancer and you guys do great in all the other areas. You guys are still compatible, but you will never do great with money. You probably have alignments that help you pull in a lot of money, but you won't be able to keep it unless you have an accountant. Right? Or you need to have a guard dog who is just like, nah, why are you asking her for money again this one? Like, you just no, come on. You just asked for money last week. What you do with that? You need to, like, that would be a compliment as well. So a lot of this is like understanding that we have these flaws. Like, none of us are made with this perfect design, but here are these things that, and that's what I point out in your chart. It's like, no, this is actually really your superpower. You should be using this more. Okay, over here, you turned your flame down too much. Over here is where you let your air energy just blow you away, and you out here in the ethers, and you need to ground yourself a little bit more so you can be focused and actually present. Over here, this is where your water energy is kind of lulling you. So even think about these elements. Just so water and earth, right? What happens? Well, water can it can water the earth and help fertilize it, or it can create mud and sludge, right?
Absolutely.
So your air and your earth energy could be fantastic. It could, blow certain things away to help germinate, right? Or it can be a dust fire. I mean, like a dust storm.
And that's the same thing with fire and fire. I have learned for myself, I do tend to do better with other people that have a lot of fire, because I have so much and I burn so hot. It can be overwhelming to people that don't have their own energy to balance it. Like, even because my friends always tell me, you are like ironclad with your boundaries. Listen, and no apologies for it, okay? But even with that, I've learned through my own experiences that if I am around people that don't have enough to balance themselves, or they don't have healthy boundaries, my fire tends to be too hot for them. And so I work well when other people have a lot of fire.
Well, your fire doesn't set boundaries.
No, not my fire setting boundaries. I meant that as a person. Like,
yeah, see, the part of you that keeps ironclad boundaries isn't your fire. That would be more of your earth energies. That would be your earth energies. So that's why it may do good with their fire energy, because their fire is kind of stoking the fire in you and raising that up. And so fire on top of earth, right? That could be like a nice bonfire.
Absolutely.
You see where that comes in. So there's a balance that is within you that is not all your fire, but it is compatible with your fire. And so you're seeking their other fire elements. Because I kind of do the same. It's like my fire. So I like I said, I'm 27% earth, right? And most of that is Capricorn with a sprinkle of some Virgo, because I have some Virgo elements in there slightly.
Okay.
But then my fire is pretty much all Sag. I have like 11th house in Leo. That's me dreaming big, right? But what happens is I tend to lean towards other people with Sagittarius elements. And that's where we're like, go create, let's do this, let's do that.
Yeah.
Because when I lean towards people who are fire elements, so I tend to like other Aries sun signs as well. The Aries sun people are just like, yeah, don't think about that, just go ahead and jump off the cliff. And I love that, because what they do is they lean towards the communication element of me that is fire, that's like, just go do that. What they also do is they stoke my Libra rising, right? So when you meet me, that the fairy is my Libra ascendant. That's air.
Okay.
That's the part of me that floats around and will go outside and will meet people and will talk to folks. And then what happened, that's also the side of me that picks up strays.
Makes sense.
So what happens is when I come home, my Capricorn sun says, who's that?
Oh my God. Yeah.
My Mars in Capricorn is like, oh no, cut that off. But I have my water is mostly Scorpio.
Okay.
Right? So I'm a Scorpio moon. My Scorpio moon will be like, pause. Do we like that? That looks like we can indulge. And if I decide that I want to indulge, then I'm going to bring you into the depths of the layer. Indulge. I'm a Lilith in Leo, right? So I got Leo in my Lilith, which is very Pied Piper. I have a lot of addictive elements too. My Pluto in Libra is in my first house. It's like crack. So you can't, so it's the part of me that lures you in as the lighthouse, right? It's the part of me that says, what is that? Okay. But then I had to learn that part even existed, so I would stop picking up strays. Because the reality is, when I did not understand that, because I need to be that lighthouse because it has to do with my gifts. What I had to understand is that portion of me existed, so my Mars in Capricorn wouldn't feel bad about setting boundaries. And my Mars in Capricorn wouldn't set rigid, mean boundaries. But it would set proactive boundaries and say, do you know why you're here? And it taught, so it's these two sides of me saying, there's one side of me that's like, oh, I just want to kind of eat that up. That looks fun.
Yeah.
I want to do that. And then the other side of me is like, now, girl, you know, you're going to have to block them later after they get addicted. Like, do you really want to block that later? Do you really want to block that later? So my Capricorn is like, you know, you got to block folks after you finish playing. Like, are you in the mood to play? And then my air and earth, my air and fire elements are like, but we could. And then all my water energy, all my water energy, the Scorpio is like, indulge. Bring them, because my Scorpio, because I'm a Venus in Scorpio, Moon in Scorpio, Uranus in Scorpio. That is, it's very succubus. Like if it's out of balance, it can be very succubus like energy, where I'm gonna like indulge in you because I think this is interesting. But it was like that when I was out of balance with my gifts, because it's a power trip when you don't understand your gifts and you don't understand why people are drawn to you. You will power trip it, right? Lilith and Leo is like the Pied Piper. My dad used to tell me, he's like, you could convince people to do anything. And he would tell me, he's like, especially men. Now, I know that sounds like a weird conversation, but he would tell me how like all my uncles are like my grandfather. He's like, your grandfather would get up in the middle of the night because you said you wanted cereal. And he said it's the weirdest thing. My grandfather was also a Sagittarius. Sagittarius are protectors of me, right? So
absolutely,
I had a lot of Sagittarius men in my family who would just be like, "Oh no, she wants this. Here you go." And so, but you see how that's also nature versus nurture, right? It's a
Yeah.
learned behavior that I learned because it's in me.
Mm-hmm.
But then as I got older, I had to learn, oh, that is actually a thing in your
Yeah.
chart. So
Yeah.
how do you use that the right way? Right? How do you
Yeah.
use that with balance? How do you understand? Because you've lured these people in and then they're like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm here. And then you're like, I'm done.
See, and that's why I said for me it's but I like how you put it. It really is nature versus nurture. Because for me, and now I feel like I got to go back and look at my chart. I
Yeah,
never
we got
connect.
to look at your whole chart because
You know, look at the
we
chart.
got to see these other elements besides the fire. I
Yes.
know you focused on the fire and kind of
Yeah.
learn how to manage that, but I'd be interested in what other fire elements are there because it would be
Yeah.
Leo, Sag, or Aries, like where those
Yeah.
other fire elements show up,
Absolutely.
um,
Now I feel
and
like I
what
need to go
that
back and
looks
look.
like.
Because I never connected my boundaries to the Virgo. So for me,
It's
I'm
your
very
Virgo.
aware of my boundaries because of training, right? So that's my nurture part. And
So that part is just you exercising the muscle that's already there, right?
right,
You see
right.
that?
So I never connected that there, right? But I tend to draw people around me that have a lot of fire. And one thing I've seen is, and now I really want to look at my chart to understand that better. Because one thing I've seen for myself, I always thought, so before I got really intentional about this a few years back, I always thought that I wouldn't do well with a lot of fire people around me. And I tended to
Mm,
have more water and earth and air. But intentionally I have sought out more friendship, more relationship with people that have a lot of fire. And
mhm,
that is where I have been my happiest. And
mhm,
I saw this in real action. There's a technical term for it, and I forgot what it is. But in nature, there's a technical term for like if there's a fire raging, they can create a smaller fire to kind of box it in
yeah,
and stop it. And when I saw that, and this person was breaking it down, I was like,
mhm.
and
And
so
that's why I tell
that's
people
what
to
I started doing.
understand their fire because you could be the gas stove, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's constantly like turn it down. You could be the bonfire. You could be a California forest fire.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And see, I'm more of the California forest fire.
Mhm.
And so what I intentionally started doing when they broke that down to me, I was like, let me play with that. And and I started intentionally like surrounding myself with people that had a lot of, and it brought this balancing effect for me.
Yeah.
And I was like, but same as
Fire is
you, you
also
have to be careful
alchemy
about that
too,
too.
right?
Yes.
Fire is alchemy. So there's a space in there where fire can take those other elements and create other things. So fire on top of water, it evaporates, there's smoke, right?
Yeah.
Which is more of an earthy type element. But then I mean that part of that evaporation turns into air.
Mm-hmm.
There's an air
Mm-hmm.
element with that. Fire with air signs, there is, I mean, that's great because the fire needs the oxygen, but then if
Mm-hmm.
there's too much oxygen, that oxygen can blow the fire out, or it
Mm-hmm.
can blow it around and spread it. And
Mm-hmm.
then that becomes an issue, right? Because, the house on fire or a piece of wood on fire, it blows it, the debris, the embers, and then there you go,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
that's not a same thing with fire on earth. um it can just burn a hole into the ground. So we have
Mm-hmm.
to kind of look. That's how, when I'm doing the chart, I'm looking at the elements as
Yeah.
well with
Yeah.
things like that, because we're looking at the elements in the zodiac, but we're also looking at the planets, because those planets all have personalities.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at those as well. There's so many, we all have layers, right? And so
True.
we have to understand those layers. So many people, in their chart, there are certain things that they may see as a kid. It's like, oh, I've seen that my whole life. Um, but then there are times where a lot of stuff develops later. You know,
Yeah.
it's just a thing. It's like that thing isn't going to really develop until a lot later.
Yeah.
So I like it. It's a great tool. I mean, you can look at astrology all day. I mean, there's ways to get like really really deep off into it. I mean, I do that with clients who are already deep into it.
Mm-hmm.
But on a surface level, I'm like, look, bump. I mean, if you like your vision boards, then fine. I'm not saying don't like a vision board. But the reality is, with the vision board, we talk about it in January, maybe a little February, and nobody talks about it anytime after, right? And so if you just follow the moon phases, then you have your checks and balances, right? Everybody can see when there's a full moon,
Mm-hmm.
real basic, right? That's going to happen once a month, maybe twice a month, depending on the month. There'll be a blue moon, which is the second full moon. But you got that full moon, right? So let's say you never look at anything astrological, and all you ever do is look up in the sky for that full moon.
Mm-hmm.
When you see that full moon, that's just a time for you to just kind of check and say, look, what do I need to let go of? That's it. Like,
I'm so
what
glad you
what
went
have I
there.
picked up this month that I need to let go of? You see that full moon, touch and agree with yourself that you're gonna let it go. That is bare minimum. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
don't need to know astrology. You don't need to check a almanac or nothing. You could look up in the sky and see that full moon. You can also look at that full moon and say, um, let me give some gratitude for what's come full circle in my life. What am I closing out? I brought this to fruition. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. Right. And you do that when you see the full moon. You might not remember that there's a full moon coming up. You might not look it up. A lot of times online, people talk about it or whatever, what moon is coming up. But there you go. That's real basic. Now, you want to incorporate another step, the new moon, right? So the new moon and the full moon are two weeks apart, about 2 weeks apart. And you can look up when the new moon is. I use the new moon and the full moon. There's like 8 moon phases or whatever. But I use the new moon and full moon. So the new moon, I'm gonna set my intentions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna say, this is the thing that I want to do for the next month. This is where I want to be focused. The full moon comes 2 weeks later, and you check in and you say, did I do any of that? Did
Mm-hmm.
I even touch that intention?
Mm-hmm.
Life is lifing. Sometimes you didn't get to touch it. Sometimes that thing that you were passionate about, you figure out a couple weeks later, like, that wasn't really for me. That was for me to
Mm-hmm.
give to somebody else. God gave that to me so I could give this to somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's really sometimes all it is. And so then you do that. So then that full moon comes, you close that out. New moon is a time. So you would have to look that up because you're not really able to look in the sky and say, I mean, we're not that structured anymore. We're able to do that. I mean, the thing is with the new moon is that's when a lot of our religious holidays are. Like, we set the new moon, we set the Easter and Passover by the new moon.
Well,
For all of our folks who are
and I was
sitting
going
on
to
here
say,
like, oh my God,
yeah,
this is against religion.
yeah,
I'm just gonna throw that out there and let y'all do with that what you want, but it's a thing. So
yeah. And I was gonna say, I'm glad you. So
it's a
I love
thing.
when people start talking
That's
about
how
that
Easter
because
moves
so
every year.
boom. Listen, and by no means am I an expert on the moons, but I will tell y'all this. I'm glad you brought it up because so years ago when I started really delving into like ritual for myself, right? And I've always been, I'm gonna do it because you said I can't do it. And so and so, when I started asking questions and looking and learning and I did have this, she called herself a witch. She was a practicing witch, and she said exactly that. She was like, okay, so for the new moon, this, and for the full moon. And I was like, but why I gotta do it that way? Why I can't do it the reverse? And she was like, oh no, if you do it. And I said, I'm gonna do it. So I experimented, right? And I played with, what does it look like to do ritual on the full moon? What does it look like to do ritual on the new moon? What does it look like if I want to manifest something on the full moon? Um, and one thing I love about energy is energy is energy is energy all day long,
Yeah, you
y'all.
can do it
And,
whenever.
right. And so, I've done a lot of my money manifesting on full moons. Um,
Mhm.
so so I love talking about that because I come across a lot of people that are nervous about that. Y'all, I grew up in Christianity, okay? Grew up Baptist. In my 20s, I was in the Pentecostal, Apostolic Church, Church of God, whatever you want to call it. And so been there, done that. And one thing that I will say from my perspective, if you have nervousness about that, it's really no different than you drinking the wine and eating the body, taking the little cracker, you know, leave that there. Is no different than
Yeah.
going to the altar. Is no different than going through the prayer line, calling the prayer line, standing at the altar in church. Is no different than asking somebody to pray over you or prophesy over you. It's really all spirit and energy. And so whether you're going to the pastor or whether you're calling on Jesus or talking to the Holy Spirit or whether you're going outside and looking at the moon, it's just truly an opportunity for you to sit in your personal power and figure out what you believe and what feels right for you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like get
And my
in the
thing is,
favor
I
and
don't
experiment.
put these things out there to try to change anybody's
Oh,
mind, to
absolutely.
convert anybody, or push anybody into anything. It's really basic for me. It's like the moon is there. You're not worshiping
Absolutely.
it, but you see it. Like you don't walk out without seeing it. So that here is this thing that is a beautiful part of our cosmos, a beautiful part of our ecosystem of every day. So, I mean, you're going to walk out every day and see the sun too.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds you to get up and do your prayers. Oh, the sun is up. Let me go ahead and do my prayers. So, why are we against saying, the moon
Yeah.
is here? Like, so the moon also is like, okay, say your prayers at night, right? The moon is out.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's really all it is. And there is energy that supports whatever, right? So if you need to release anything, you don't have to wait on a waning moon to do that. Like, okay, this thing has been heavy, it's weighing on you, you need to release it.
Do it.
Today's a good day.
Mhm. And that's why I like that because a lot of people do teach from a place of scarcity. They teach from a place of fear. They teach from a place of it made sense for them, right? And so I always want to offer that reminder to you all because I know I attract a lot of seasoned people, but I also attract a lot of newbies. And so if you're trying to figure out what this looks like for you guys, if you're trying to challenge yourself to get out of the comfort zone a little bit, just tiptoe. You ain't got to dive in the deep end. You ain't got to do everything we're saying, but at least give yourself permission to tiptoe and experiment and figure out what works for you because somebody else said it and they only did it that way doesn't mean that you can't, right? So that's why I love having these
Yeah.
conversations because we get to share with you the things that made sense, that worked, that nourished our souls, and then you get to dibble and dabble and pick it up. But for whatever the reason, Spirit has decided part of my lot in life is to attract a lot of Christians. And I think in part you guys are attracted to me because I've shared a lot about my journey through the years of growing up in Christianity and being groomed. In my 20s I was groomed to go into pastoralship. I was supposed to become a whole minister and run a church, and I realized that was just not my path, right? I realized that's not what I wanted to do. That's not what made me happy. So I've shared that with you all a lot through the years, and I know that some of you watch my videos and y'all be like, here she go with that shit again. But that being said, take something from what we're talking about, whether it's the astrology or the moon, because y'all, I love it. I love getting outside and just
Yeah.
looking at the sun or the moon and being like, hey, yo, thank you for being up there today. You know what I mean? Like, whatever you believe,
Hello,
there's
because
a way.
if the moon drops out of orbit, we in trouble.
Like, what? Okay.
And
Okay.
that's scientific.
Listen, this is how I look at this thing.
Like
Like,
if it
real,
shifts even a little bit to the left, we in trouble.
we time. This is how I look at this. If we have enough faith in whatever you believe in, if we all have enough faith existing on this planet to trust that this big ass rock ain't gonna fall out the sky at any given moment, then we have enough available within ourselves to try different things and to
Yeah.
trust different pieces of the right. So I know y'all be like, here she go with this again. But again, take what makes sense for y'all, use it, enjoy it, experiment. Be the renegade, y'all. I'm like a bull in a china shop. I'm like, you said I can't do it, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do
Well,
it.
and you know what
You
the
know.
other thing is, I tell people too, is like, because people will come and they'll be like, what is it that you believe in? And I'm like, first of all, if you were paying attention to all the things on my page, I'm always referencing God. Like it's very clear. I don't hide anything. There's none of that. There's nothing. There's no ulterior motive or
Yeah.
anything like that. So it's like super duper clear. You're here because you see light. Hashtag the end. You're
I
here
love
because you
that.
see light.
I
That's
love
it.
that.
And because see, if you didn't see light, right, you wouldn't be here. And so now your discernment has to kick in as to why you washed up to this shore. What
Absolutely.
you feel, that anxiety that you're talking about that people feel is simply their soul at war with their
Oh,
mind, right?
absolutely.
Because the
Absolutely.
mind has been tuned to hear certain things or only accept certain things, or it has to look a certain way, or you have to do the ritual like this, you have to do this isn't called this, it's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
even with Reiki, I've had people ask me about Reiki, and they rock with me for all the other stuff I do, but then when I introduced Reiki, they're like, what's that? I said, first of all, you're interested. Like, if you thought it was that evil, demonic, negative, you wouldn't even ask me about it, right? But you're asking me because you see the light in it, and you're also like, well, I trust her not to do anything crazy, so it's not crazy, right? So that's why you're asking, and that's why you're here. Because if your
Mhm.
soul was not open to it, it would be a hard no. I can't tell
Mhm.
you how many times like I've looked at something and I'm like, and it's like, that's it. Like that's a no, right? So we
Mhm.
know what that feels like. I tell people Reiki is like your grandmother's prayers, right? So it's like your grandma's prayers. Your grandma lives in Texas, you live in California. You got something going on. Did you ever question whether her prayers reached you from Texas to California? You never questioned it. You were like, Big Mom prayed for me, and she prayed and she covered you. As a matter of fact, you said my grandmother's prayers are still covering me, and grandma been gone for 10 years. Like, you
Oh,
believe that
absolutely.
it transverses realms, right? So why would me sending you Reiki energy not be the same thing, right? You also believe in corporate prayer from the church, right? Sick and shut in list. You believe in that, right? So we believe
Absolutely.
that there are some elders at the church who see you on a list because you couldn't make it to church because you're sick, and they prayed over you, and you believe those prayers covered you, right? Because those prayers can transcend energy, any realm, long distance, what have you. Energy is the same thing with Reiki and those things like that, right? And so what I'm seeing happen is that people are starting to understand the common sense of that. And so
Mm.
now they're tacking on Christian things. So it's like, no, it can't be yoga because that's demonic, but it can be Christian yoga. Where you
I
getting
just
your
look at it.
principles from? It's still yoga, right?
Yeah.
It's
I
not
just look at it as
meditation.
fear.
It's not
It's
meditation.
just
It's
fear.
Christian meditation.
Yeah.
It's still the
Well, I
same
just look at
thing.
it as fear. People are, I know for me. So it's funny
It's
because I
fear and
have
it's
a,
power trip. It's fear and
yeah,
it's a power trip.
I have a friend that has another podcast, and I just happened to click into his the other day, and however they got onto it, they were talking about religion and some other things, and there was a lady, for all intents and purposes, I will say she was Christian, is my assumption based on her comments, and she was fanatical with it. And you could see that she was getting upset and yelling at all caps and just carrying on, and so as the conversation was going on and people were commenting, I just was tickled. And at one point I said, it's funny to me as I look back, um, because one of the hosts was asking, well, why does it seem like you're getting upset? Like, what about this conversation is bothering you? Like, people are asking questions, we're having honest dialogue. Why is that
Yeah.
bothersome to you? And so I commented and I said, it's funny to me, as I think back, when I was still under the label of Christianity and I was kind of working my way out of it, I had a friend who was Muslim. And he was one of my best friends at the time. And I remember him saying to me, every time I meet a Christian, they always angry. And my immediate response was to get angry. And I was like, wait, I had to check myself, like, wait, okay, what's happening here?
That's funny.
Right. And so as I dug into it for myself, what I realized, and I shared this in the comments with them, I said, for me, I came to a place of understanding that my anger was for two reasons. One, there was a lot of fear because I felt so indoctrinated in what made sense, what had been told to me, what had been shared to me, what had been preached at to me, how I had been told to interpret scripture. Like, there was a lot of fear for me, because I don't want to speak for everybody else, on if I step outside this boundary, what happens to me, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conviction and conflict for me because a lot of what I was being taught didn't sit well with me inwardly. And so I felt a lot of internal conflict of, how do I make this make sense? This is what I've grown up in. This is what everybody that I know and everybody that I love believes, but I don't know. This doesn't make sense to me. I don't like this.
Yeah, like I heard that, and that's kind of common
Right.
sense. Like that makes
Right.
like that does add up. Okay.
Right. And so that's what I was sharing with them is I think a lot of the times, and that's why I'm always open with my audience, like, listen, I know some of you all are going to struggle with parts of this conversation, and that's okay. Let it be a struggle. You don't have to fix it overnight, right?
Yeah.
Let yourself walk through it, feel through it, and figure out what resonates and what makes sense for you, because everything won't for everybody, and that's okay. But I always also challenge, if it's something that just doesn't sit, look at that and be willing to ask yourself these questions. Why doesn't it sit? Is it because this is a no for me? My soul, my spirit, my oversoul, my team, whatever you believe in, is like, nope, don't pass go, don't collect $200. This ain't it. Leave it alone.
Hard pass. Yeah.
Or right, hard pass. Or is it something that you're like, well, I don't know. Right. Be willing to dig deeper to ask yourself these questions. Because what I said again, I stand on, everything don't work for everybody, but everything can work for anybody. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be your bailiwick. Let that shit go. But
That's right.
if it makes sense for you, if it does something for you, be willing to dig in, because it might be the thing that gives you the release, that gives you the relief, that gives you the thing that you've been looking for to get to your next level of healing. And when I say healing, y'all know I am big on saying healing doesn't mean that you're perfect or that you've hit this end game where everything is great and you never have to do anything
Mm-hmm.
or work on anything. Healing for me is an experience, right? It's a journey of self, learning self, understanding self, know thyself. And it's a never ending journey until you take your last breath in this body and figure out whatever your next step is on the other side of that.
Yeah.
But be open, guys, for again, I love having these conversations about astrology, especially because for me, it made a lot of things make sense for me that weren't making sense in other contexts. And so my hope is that as you all dive into these juicy bits and as we continue to have these conversations, guys, that you will pick up bits and pieces that make sense for you and that you can use and internalize and become more of yourself. Because that's the end goal for me. Everything that I share is all about helping you become the next best version of you, whether that's 5 years from now, 2 minutes from now,
Yep.
whatever that is.
For
So,
sure.
so as we bring this particular conversation to an end until we chat again, what is the thing? I always love to ask this question at the end. If they take nothing else, what is the thing that you hope that they hold on to from today's conversation?
Oh my. That is such a good question. Oh
We
my
talked about
goodness.
so much.
What? I'm like, girl, this whole thing we just chatted about like life and
We did.
everything.
I told you
Okay.
it's gonna be juicy.
I know. I'm like, oh wait. Oh. I think the biggest thing is to find you. Find you in all of these things. There's so many things out there, in the world. There's so many different religions, ideas, doctrine, therapies. There's so many different things. And what is good for you? And then also understanding that, like, one of the things I do with my clients is like we create a personal development toolkit, right? So you put all these things in your toolkit, and they're things that have proven to work for you, but maybe in this period of time, that one thing in your toolkit, like, that's not what you need. Be okay with that. Like, just be able to explore and gather the things that work for you, so you have them in the storehouse. Learn these different things. Use your discernment and your intuition. What resonates? Why does that resonate? Right? Like, speak to your souls. Have that soul conversation about what resonates and what feels good to you, and sit with that. Be honest with yourself about what those things are. Incorporate those in your toolkit, and then pull them as you need them, right? So I think it's just, being discerning. Even in this conversation, if there's something in this conversation where you're just like, that's not really it, there's nothing wrong with that. It's like, that just doesn't resonate with me. Totally fine, right? Because we talked about a lot: astrology, numerology, like, we ran the gamut. If there's something that doesn't resonate, that's cool. Like, that's not where you're at. You may run this conversation back 6 months from now and be like, oh, that's what that was. Oh, okay. And it doesn't mean you're more enlightened. It just means that maybe this hit different at a different time. So I think the biggest thing is just like being open and really being in your discernment and being honest with yourself. So as those things like kind of tap at you, we're not reacting to them with anger or fear or apprehension. I'm learning to just be like, why is that on my radar? Like, why am I even paying attention to that? Because if it's something that's not for me, it usually it's a hard pass. It goes over my head. But if it's something that kind of landed and it's dancing in front of me and it's like waving, I'm like, wait, let me look at this. So just that portion of being open. I hope people, lean into that more. It doesn't mean that you have to become an astrology expert or even look at anything astrology based. You can still find your compatibility how you want to find your compatibility. But just being open to know that there are other healing elements out here that are really helping people, and like being cool with that, not just saying, you know what, well, no, that doesn't work for me, so that's not okay. No, it worked for somebody else. Let them go live their life. Because some of the things that work for you don't work for other people, and people are letting you live yours.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the fact you called it a toolkit. Love that. Literally one of the things that I've talked about for years with my students and my clients, and I'm so glad to hear somebody else talking about it. I've always advocated for them to create their spiritual toolbox. Because what I explain to them is, just like you buy a house or you get a car, there are certain things you need to have on hand. Yes, you need that mechanic, or you need to be able to go to the dealership, or you need to have the maintenance guy or the contractor to do certain things. But there are certain things you need to have readily available to maintain that car, or fix something on your house, whether it be a plunger for your bathroom or mats in your car to keep as much dirt off the carpet as possible, whatever that may be. You need a vacuum cleaner, all those things, right? And so creating your spiritual toolbox equips you so that when life inevitably happens, because there's always going to be happening, life will always life, you are equipped. In the moment when it's happening, we often shut down, we freeze, that fight or flight kicks in, we feel overwhelmed, we can't think, we can't process. And so we're stuck trying to figure out, well, I don't know what to do. But when you're consciously and continuously cultivating that toolbox, you've always got something that you can pull from. And so I always advocate for them to write it down, get you a list. I don't care if you start with 2 things, 5 things, 10 things, doesn't matter. But write a list down, right? Is it journaling? Is it going for a walk? Do I have a playlist on YouTube? Do I have a playlist in my Amazon or my Spotify or whatever? Do I have favorite movies? Do I have favorite songs? Do I have a safety blanket or a safety pillow or a bear? Are there people? What are the things that typically work? Because they're not going to all work all the time. But if you have this list and you're constantly adding to this toolbox, then when life happens, you've got a resource that you can readily go to and just go through the list. This didn't work. Let's try this. That helped a little bit. Let's keep going until you get the relief and the release that you need. Right. So thank you so much for talking about that, because I'm always advocating for them to do this. And they're like, you're always saying this. I know. And then
It's a
there's
thing.
all, it's the thing. And there's that moment when they come back and they're like, you know what? It worked. And I'm like, see, there's a reason for this. So with that, thank you for that. And then I'll leave you all with this. Be willing to be adventurous and to experiment. It's not all going to work for you. It's not all going to resonate. It's not all going to make sense. Everything isn't going to be your thing. But if you're constantly willing to experiment, to give yourself permission to step outside of the box of what your culture said, or your religion said, or your family said, or your community said, or your grandmama said, or your daddy said, or your bestie said, or even your person, your spouse said, if you are willing to release yourself from the bondage of the box that makes sense for them, and create your own space, create your own safety container, and allow yourself to swim as deep as you want to and take breaks as you need to. But if you're willing to experiment and be adventurous, you get to create a healing experience and a healing journey that will ultimately serve you in the best ways possible. Because for me, I pull a little bit from astrology, I pull a little bit from Hinduism, I pull a little bit from Christianity, I pull a little bit and a lot from Christianity,
Me
and
too.
witchy practices and hoodoo practices, because none of those things were my one and only journey. But all of those things have helped me to dig deeper, to find the different layers of me, different aspects of me that needed to be expressed, right? So be adventurous, guys. Be
Yeah.
faithful enough to yourself and whatever else you believe externally. Be faithful enough to yourself to be adventurous and to experiment, because that is where you will find the most potent, powerful, prosperous version of you. So with that, thank you so much for your time, Miss
Thank you.
Tamara. Y'all look on the information. This is one big old video, but you might have also seen it by the time you're watching this. We might have chopped it up and put it in different places and had different snippets. So look in the information on the videos to be able to get in touch with either one of us. If you need more support, we got you, boo things and badasses. Reach out for those astrology reports. Reach out for the therapeutic support or the wellness support or whatever it is that you need that we have to offer, and let us help you, because that's my final reminder for today. No man is an island, and ain't none of us meant to do all of this alone.
Very
Okay.
true.
We need each other. We need community. So look in the information up under these videos wherever you're seeing it, and make sure that you reach out to one of us or both of us to get the help and the support that you need. And be on the lookout, because this is the first of many juicy conversations that we are going to be bringing to you all. With that, again, I love you all for being a part of my audience. And thank you so much, Miss Tamara, for
Thank
just bringing
you.
your light, bringing your joy, and bringing your badassery. Okay, boo thing.
Hello.